Millie walked into the diner with a few friends, hoping for a light, fun afternoon. But the moment she stepped inside, a group of boys from her school surrounded her. They sneered, mocked her looks, and tossed napkins at her like she was nothing. Tears welled up in her eyes as their laughter echoed in the small diner. Matthew watched from the counter, his chest tight, knowing that stepping in could cost him his job. But the cruelty was unbearable. Something inside him snapped and he marched forward, voice shaking but firm. "That's enough! Leave her alone or get out of here." The boys laughed even harder, mocking him, while Millie sobbed quietly, trembling. Just then, Christine stormed in to fetch her sister. Instead of relief or thanks, her lips curled in disgust as she watched Matthew protect Millie. She screamed, venom dripping from every word. "Don't touch her! I don't need some low-class waiter babysitting my sister. You're not even worthy to be in the same room as her?" The manager, terrified of Christine's power in the city, sided with her without a second thought. Matthew's apron was ripped off his shoulders, his dignity crushed as he was fired on the spot. He left the diner drenched in rain and shame, the sting of injustice burning hotter than any storm outside. But that day was only the beginning, because what happened next would turn everything upside down, revealing secrets and courage no one saw coming. Who would rise, and who would fall when the truth finally came to light? But before we go on, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now let's uncover how this story really began. The diner buzzed with the low hum of conversation, clinking silverware, and the occasional burst of laughter that never quite reached the corners where Matthew worked. He moved from table to table, balancing plates of burgers and fries with the practiced ease of a man who had spent countless hours navigating this chaotic little world. Each step was measured, each smile carefully placed. Yet beneath the surface, his mind was a tempest of worry. His mother's health had been deteriorating for weeks, and every tip, every paycheck, felt like a fragile lifeline tethering him to her well-being. He had no room for error, no margin for indulgence, and certainly no time for trouble. That fragile balance shattered the moment Millie entered. She was only 16, small and tentative, a shadow of the confident young girl she might one day become. She walked with two girls who seemed more like props than friends, their conversation a thin barrier against the anxiety written across Millie's face. Her eyes darted nervously, scanning the diner, gripping the straps of her backpack as if they could anchor her to safety. 3 boys from her high school appeared like predators drawn to an easy target. They cornered her near the soda fountain, their smirks widening, their laughter a harsh wind that cut through the diner's warmth. "Look at you!" one sneered, ugly as ever. Another flung a napkin that smacked her cheek. She flinched, blinking back tears she didn't have the courage to release. Matthew's heart tightened. He had learned, early on, that intervening could be dangerous. The diner's manager had made it clear countless times. Do your job, keep your head down, and survive. But this was different. He could not bear to watch helplessness being punished, innocence mocked. He gripped his notepad so tightly that his knuckles whitened, his chest pounding, a mixture of fear and something fiercer, indignation. The boys pushed her, crude hands shoving against her shoulders. Millie stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the soda fountain, her breath hitching. That was the moment Matthew's decision solidified. He set down the tray he was carrying, straightened his posture, and walked toward them, each step a deliberate assertion of presence. His voice rang out, firm yet controlled, cutting through the din. "That's enough. You leave her alone, or you leave the premises." The boys laughed, mockery dripping from every word. "And who are you?" one jeered. "Her babysitter?" Matthew didn't flinch. He positioned himself between them and Millie like a living barrier, every muscle taut, his eyes unwavering. "No. I'm someone who won't let you hurt her." There was no threat in his tone, only resolve, And in that moment, he became more than a waiter. He became a shield, a testament to courage in the smallest, most overlooked corners of life. Then, the diner door chimed, a sound that normally signaled arrival and opportunity, but this time brought dread. Christine stormed in, designer bag swinging, a figure of controlled outrage. Her eyes locked on Matthew, taking in the scene, her mind refusing to parse it with reason. She saw a black man standing over her crying sister, and the sight ignited something in her, a visceral disgust she could barely articulate. "Get away from her!" she screamed, voice sharp and piercing. Her words cut like knives, laced with disdain and a confidence built on wealth and social standing. She looked at Matthew as if he were something beneath consideration. "I don't need a low-class waiter playing nanny to my sister. You aren't fit to breathe the same air as us." The manager appeared, panic etched into his face, caught between the duty to his staff and the fear of displeasing a wealthy socialite. He stumbled over apologies, desperate to placate Christine. Without a word to Matthew, without listening to a single explanation, he fired him on the spot. Matthew's heart sank, but his dignity remained intact. He took off his apron, the fabric brushing against his chest like the final tether to a life momentarily unmoored. He stood for a heartbeat, collecting himself, before moving toward the back door. The rain outside greeted him like an old friend, heavy and relentless. Soaking through his clothes but unable to penetrate the quiet pride swelling in his chest. As he walked, head down and thoughts swirling, a black limousine rolled up slowly beside him. The rear window lowered with the soft click of polished metal. Inside, an elderly, distinguished man with a calm yet penetrating gaze met Matthew's. This moment, unexpected and surreal, hinted that the world was still capable of justice, of recognition for integrity when it was most needed. Matthew paused, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, and allowed himself a flicker of hope amidst the exhaustion and heartache. His journey was only beginning, and though the night was dark, there was a sense that the storm outside was a mirror of the trials ahead, and perhaps of the triumphs to come. The rain had soaked Matthew through, but the chill of the evening did little to dampen the rush of emotions running through him. Drenched and weary, he paused beside the sleek black limousine, uncertain, his pulse a rapid rhythm against the quiet hum of the city night. The rear window slowly descended, and behind it sat a figure that seemed almost unreal in the storm-slicked streetlight. The man was elderly, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with silver hair combed precisely, and eyes that held the weight of experience without arrogance. There was a quiet authority in the way he regarded Matthew, and yet, surprisingly, there was no judgment, no condescension. Matthew straightened, unsure whether to offer a greeting, to explain himself, or simply to flee from the embarrassment of having been fired moments ago. The man's gaze was steady, and when he spoke, the tone was calm but carried undeniable gravity. "I haven't seen courage like that in a long time, son," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, like a quiet drumbeat that demanded attention without force. "Most men would have kept their job. You kept your honor." Matthew blinked, taken aback. The words felt strange, almost alien. Most people saw him as a waiter, a man at the bottom of the social ladder, easily dismissed, often invisible. Yet here, in the middle of a wet, gray night, a stranger, an unmistakably powerful stranger, was recognizing him, not for his title or appearance, but for something deeper. His chest swelled with an unfamiliar mix of pride and disbelief. "Sir, I was just trying to," he began, unsure how to articulate the complex tangle of guilt, shame, and hope swirling inside him. Sterling smiled faintly, not patronizingly, but with the kind of warmth that comes from someone who truly sees another human being. "Trying is what most people call it," he said. "Acting, even when fear tells you not to, is what makes men." He reached into the pocket of his suit and pulled out a card, offering it with a steady hand. The simple gesture felt monumental. I own the most exclusive event venue in the state, the Sterling Estate. I need someone who has integrity to manage my floor staff. I need someone I can trust not to falter when the pressure comes. You." Matthew stared at the card, the words printed on the cream-colored surface almost blurring as his mind raced. It seemed impossible. He'd been a waiter all his life, navigating small jobs that demanded patience more than skill, endurance more than vision. Yet here, a man of influence and means was offering him not charity, not pity, but opportunity, an actual chance to rise, to show his worth on a stage he had never imagined existing. I don't know, sir," Matthew admitted, voice trembling slightly. "I'm just a waiter." Sterling's eyes softened, but the strength of his gaze never wavered. "No, you're not just a waiter," he said. "You're a leader. You just haven't been given a regiment yet." The words hit Matthew like a warm, steady light in the darkness of self-doubt. For a long moment, he was silent, absorbing the weight of responsibility and trust. The rain pattered around them, the city sounds dim behind the door of the limousine, and Matthew realized that for the first time in a long while, the world was opening a door instead of shutting it in his face. He took the card, clenching it as though it were a lifeline, a promise, and not just a slip of paper. I'll do my best, sir," he said finally, the words trembling but resolute. Sterling nodded, a small, approving tilt of his head, and then the car moved on, leaving Matthew alone in the rain. But he no longer felt abandoned. He felt seen, recognized, and most importantly, capable. 3 months passed in a blur of transformation. Matthew learned quickly that the Sterling Estate was not merely a venue, but a complex organism of expectations, personalities, and traditions. He immersed himself in the work, discovering talents he had never acknowledged in himself. Where he had once delivered plates and refilled drinks, he now coordinated large teams, mediated conflicts, and orchestrated events with a precision that left even the most experienced staff in awe. His uniform had shifted from apron and jeans to a sharp suit, his posture carrying a confidence that was quietly commanding. Yet he never forgot the humility that had defined him, the empathy that had driven him to stand for Millie, the patience that allowed him to see the nuances in every human interaction. His team adored him, not for the authority of his position, but for the respect and consideration he afforded them. Matthew remembered names, small details, the quiet fears and struggles of those around him, and he became a manager who nurtured both skill and spirit. Guests noticed the difference too, the subtle but unmistakable presence of someone who genuinely cared. It was late one afternoon, sunlight streaking across the polished floors of the grand hall, when Matthew found himself alone with the guest list for the Sterling Estate's most prestigious event of the year. The envelope felt heavy in his hands, the expectation of the entire city riding on each name printed inside. One by one, he scanned the list, checking for duplicates, confirming addresses, ensuring that every detail was precise. And then he froze. His eyes widened, heart skipping a beat as the words solidified before him. Christine Vanderhoven. Time seemed to slow. Every memory from that diner, the mocking laughter, the humiliation, the rage and helplessness he had felt flashed unbidden before him. Christine's face, sharp with disdain and arrogance, seemed to hover at the edge of his mind. He felt a pang of anxiety, a tremor of anger, and yet beneath it, a strange, simmering resolve. He straightened the papers, letting the cool weight of reality anchor him. This was the very person who had tried to belittle and dismiss him, and now, fate or perhaps destiny, had placed him in a position of quiet power, capable of shaping the outcome of her most extravagant ambitions. Matthew's fingers traced the edges of the paper, a mixture of nostalgia, vindication, and nervous anticipation swirling in his chest. The journey from that diner to this moment had been treacherous, filled with uncertainty and hardship. But standing there in the hushed grandeur of the Sterling estate, he felt the first stirrings of triumph not born of revenge, but of integrity, perseverance, and the quiet strength that had carried him this far. The storm had not broken him, it had made him. The planning room at the Sterling estate was bathed in soft, golden light that reflected off the polished mahogany table and the crystal chandeliers overhead. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, cutting sharp lines across the floor, yet none of its warmth reached the tension that hung thick in the air. Matthew stood at the head of the table, his posture immaculate, his sharp suit a contrast to the chaos of his memories. Every detail of the room, every folder, every sample, bore the mark of his attention and discipline. He had worked tirelessly to ensure nothing was left to chance, to craft an atmosphere where elegance and efficiency merged seamlessly. The door opened with a quiet yet authoritative click, and Christine stepped in, radiant in designer elegance, her fiancé Richard trailing behind. Richard, kind and smiling, carried the casual obliviousness of someone untouched by cruelty. Unaware of the subtleties of manipulation and entitlement that his fiancée wielded with practiced ease. He greeted Matthew warmly, shaking his hand with sincere admiration, while Matthew's eyes briefly flickered toward Christine. Recognition passed between them like an electric current. Her lips parted slightly, her eyebrows lifting in a flash of disbelief. It was him, the same man she had dismissed, humiliated, and fired months ago. Yet here he stood, commanding the room with quiet authority. Christine leaned closer to Richard, lowering her voice so that he would not hear, her eyes sharp and cold. "I see you've failed upwards," she whispered, venom lacing every syllable. "Don't think a fancy suit changes what you are. One mistake, and I'll have you fired here too." Her words were calculated to sting, to remind him of the past humiliation, to destabilize the carefully constructed confidence he now embodied. Matthew's lips curved into a polite smile, almost serene in its calmness, yet his eyes held a steely determination that betrayed the fire within. "I assure you, miss," he said, voice smooth, composed, "I plan on making this an event everyone will remember." There was no challenge in his tone, no aggression, only a commitment to excellence that transformed anger into precision. Each word, each gesture, channeled the memory of the diner, the injustice, and the humiliation he had endured into a quiet, unassailable strength. As the meeting progressed, Matthew moved with practiced efficiency, addressing questions, delegating tasks, and coordinating schedules. He noted every detail with a meticulousness that demanded attention, but his gaze occasionally drifted to the corner where Millie labored. She carried fabric swatches, her small hands shaking slightly as she tried to keep pace with Christine's relentless demands. The girl's eyes, wide and fearful, flitted to Matthew as if seeking refuge in the presence of someone who had once protected her. Christine's tone was sharp, imperious, each command a lash that belied the girl's youth and vulnerability. Matthew's chest tightened with a familiar ache, a mixture of protective instinct and outrage that had not dimmed since that rainy evening at the diner. The meeting concluded and the guests departed, leaving Matthew alone in the vast office with folders, contracts, and invoices spread across the desk. He moved through them with methodical care, cataloging, verifying, and reconciling every line. The hours passed with a quiet, focused intensity, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of papers or the soft ticking of a wall clock. Then, late into the night, as the estate grew silent and the chandeliers cast long, solemn shadows across the room, something caught his eye. A particular invoice among the carefully ordered paperwork did not align. Christine had submitted a billing authorization claiming that the wedding would be fully funded by a trust fund. Yet the signature on the document seemed off slightly too rigid, unnaturally curved in ways that did not match the authentic handwriting he had seen elsewhere. His heart skipped a beat. He felt a wave of apprehension, a tension that tightened his chest, but also a thrill of discovery. His eyes, sharp from months of discipline and attention to detail, scrutinized the paper, following the lines of the signature like a map leading to an unspoken truth. The implications hit him with the weight of a hammer. If this was forged, then everything Christine had built, her calculated persona, the wealth she claimed to control, the authority she wielded over Millie and the estate, was a lie. The careful veneer of sophistication and entitlement hid a desperate, unethical pursuit of advantage. Matthew felt the surge of responsibility again, the same sense of duty that had propelled him into the fray months earlier. He could not, would not, ignore this. The stakes were far higher now, the consequences far more complex, and yet he felt the familiar grounding of purpose. He leaned back, letting his eyes drift to the moonlit horizon visible through the expansive windows. Memories of the diner, the rain, the humiliation, and Christine's sneer all fused into a quiet clarity. This was no longer a test of patience or endurance. It was a moment that demanded discernment, courage, and careful planning. Matthew's shoulders squared. He would protect Millie. He would uphold integrity, and he would navigate this storm not with anger alone, but with intelligence, precision, and empathy. A long exhale escaped him, a mixture of relief and tension. The discovery had awakened in him the full measure of his responsibility, not as a manager, not merely as an employee, but as a guardian of truth. He could feel the weight of the coming days pressing upon him, yet beneath it a sense of readiness, a subtle exhilaration that the world, for all its cruelty and complexity, had not yet defeated him. As the night deepened, Matthew allowed himself a fleeting moment to reflect. He recalled the first time he had stood for Millie, the first time he had chosen honor over survival. And now the path ahead seemed daunting, but surmountable. He was no longer the man who had been powerless in the diner, shamed and dismissed. He was someone who had learned to channel pain into purpose, humiliation into strategy, and vulnerability into the quiet strength of decisive action. The discrepancy in the paperwork was more than a detail. It was a thread that, once pulled, could unravel a carefully constructed web of deception. Matthew felt the first stirrings of the plan that would test his resolve, intellect, and moral compass. He knew the path would be difficult, that Christine would not yield easily, and that Millie's safety, trust, and dignity depended on his unwavering vigilance. Yet the challenge invigorated him. He had endured injustice, emerged stronger, and now possessed the ability to confront it with clarity, composure, and compassion. As the moon rose high over the Sterling estate, casting pale silver across the polished floors, Matthew continued his work, determined to uncover the truth and protect those who could not protect themselves. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice of hope whispered, reminding him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it, and that every trial, no matter how daunting, could lead to redemption and renewal if met with integrity and heart. Matthew sat at his desk in the quiet of the Sterling estate late into the night, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The folders and papers spread before him were neat, methodical, yet a subtle unease lingered in the pit of his stomach. He had spent months building trust, crafting events with care, and navigating the intricate web of expectations and egos that accompanied the elite clientele of the estate. But something about Christine's paperwork gnawed at him, not just a small discrepancy, but a sense that it was symptomatic of a larger, more troubling truth. He leaned back in his chair, fingertips brushing the edge of the forged authorization. His mind drifted for a moment, and memories of the diner flooded him unbidden. The sting of humiliation, the injustice, the sense of being judged not for his character, but for the circumstances of his life. He had been dismissed, degraded, dismissed for merely acting on his instincts to protect someone vulnerable. That same instinct stirred within him now, a quiet, persistent voice insisting he approach the situation with care, diligence, and integrity. He refused to jump to conclusions, knowing how dangerous assumptions could be. Instead, he began to investigate, tracing the paper trail with meticulous attention. Hours passed. The silence of the estate was broken only by the soft rustle of documents and the occasional distant call of an owl. Matthew followed the lines of signatures, traced account numbers, and cross-referenced legal documents. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, stark and undeniable. The trust fund, the one Christine claimed to control, was not hers. The legal documents, the wills, and the financial statements confirmed it. The wealth belonged to Millie. Every dollar, every asset had been left to her by her parents, with Christine granted only a modest stipend as a temporary guardian until Millie reached her 18th birthday. The magnitude of the truth pressed on Matthew's chest, a weight both sobering and galvanizing. Christine's motives became chillingly clear. The woman who had sneered at him in the diner, who had treated Millie like property, who had sought to humiliate and dominate, was now desperate. Her finances were depleted, and the inheritance she had no right to access was the only buffer between her and financial ruin. She was planning to marry Richard, not for love, nor for companionship, but to secure her future before Millie could claim what was rightfully hers. Each revelation tightened the knot of responsibility in Matthew's chest. This was no longer simply about a discrepancy in paperwork. This was about protecting a vulnerable young woman from manipulation, theft, and emotional abuse. Later that afternoon, during a routine site visit, Matthew found himself walking along the manicured paths of the estate's expansive gardens. The air was crisp, carrying the delicate scent of roses and freshly trimmed hedges. He rounded a corner near the fountain and froze for a heartbeat. Seeing Millie crouched near the flower beds, fingers brushing over the petals as if seeking comfort from their fragile beauty. She looked up, startled, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of recognition and wariness. "Hey," Matthew said gently, keeping his distance, careful not to startle her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a glass of lemonade, the condensation beating on the surface. "I thought you might like this," he offered, his voice warm, genuine. There was no condescension in his tone, no hint of superiority, only recognition of her humanity, her worth, and the care she deserved. Millie hesitated, then took the glass, her hands trembling slightly. You're the only one who ever stood up for me," she whispered, her voice fragile but imbued with a raw honesty that made Matthew's heart ache. The memory of that day in the diner, of his decision to intervene despite fear and consequence, mingled with the present moment. He could feel the trust and relief radiating from her, the fragile but undeniable bond forged through courage and empathy. She lowered her gaze, sipping the lemonade slowly, as if savoring not just the drink, but the act of being seen, of being treated like a person rather than a possession. Matthew crouched slightly, keeping his posture relaxed, letting her feel safe without intruding. "You don't have to face this alone, Millie," he said softly. "Whatever's happening, we'll find a way to make it right." Her eyes filled with tears, and her voice cracked as she admitted the truth she had been carrying in silence. "Christine. She said she'd send me to a boarding school overseas right after the wedding," she confessed, her hands gripping the glass as if it were an anchor to reality. She doesn't want me to have access to my money. She said I couldn't stop her." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, suffocating in their clarity and cruelty. Matthew felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the blend of anger and responsibility that had defined his character since that rainy day months ago. He had a choice. He could allow this to unfold, stay within the boundaries of his professional role, and preserve his position, or he could rise to the challenge, using every ounce of his intelligence, courage, and integrity to protect Millie. The decision was instant, inevitable, and absolute. He reached out, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, not as a gesture of ownership or authority, but as a promise of protection. "We're going to fix this, Millie," he said firmly. "I won't let her hurt you. You deserve better, and I'll make sure you get it." For the first time in weeks, Millie's expression softened, a fragile smile breaking through the fear. The warmth of trust, the reassurance of safety, and the quiet strength of Matthew's presence allowed her a moment of relief. And in that moment, Matthew understood the full weight of his responsibility, not just as a manager or a professional, but as a guardian, a shield, and a catalyst for justice. The night deepened and the estate grew silent around them, but Matthew felt the spark of resolve ignite within him. The path ahead was daunting, fraught with risk and moral complexity, yet he embraced it with unwavering determination. Millie's future, her dignity, and her right to what was hers depended on him. He would not fail her, just as he had never failed anyone who needed his courage and compassion. And as he looked out across the moonlit gardens, he felt the first stirrings of a plan, one born not from anger or revenge, but from the steadfast conviction that protecting the vulnerable was the truest measure of strength. The Sterling estate hummed with activity, its usually immaculate halls buzzing with anticipation and tension. The wedding was only a week away, and the final tasting had been scheduled, a delicate orchestration of flavors, presentation, and timing that could make or break the event. Matthew moved among the staff like a conductor, his sharp eyes catching every misstep, his hands deftly correcting each minor error without a trace of impatience. Every glass was polished, every napkin folded precisely, every dish timed to perfection. He was calm, professional, and meticulous. Yet, beneath the surface, he could feel the pulse of tension running through the staff, a reflection of the anxiety he himself carried. Christine swept through the room like a storm, her presence sharp and electric. She inspected the arrangements with the intensity of someone who believed that perfection could only be achieved through intimidation. Her eyes darted from the plated appetizers to the desserts, her judgmental gaze settling briefly on the staff before flicking toward Matthew. Richard trailed behind her, offering polite smiles and soft reassurances, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents that governed his fiancée's every word and action. Christine's agitation was palpable. The budget was tighter than expected, and each minor inconvenience became an opportunity to vent her frustration. She snapped at servers over the placement of dishes, criticized assistants for the slightest misalignment of cutlery, and whispered sharp instructions with a voice that dripped impatience and disdain. The staff moved like dancers under her whip, attempting to anticipate every demand while hiding the subtle fear that tinged their movements. Matthew remained composed, moving efficiently to correct errors and maintain order, each gesture precise, each instruction calm yet firm. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned, through experience, that professionalism could temper chaos and maintain equilibrium. But Christine's eyes kept returning to him, calculating, measuring, and finally settling on a plan. She would remove the one variable she could not control, Matthew himself. If he were gone, the staff might crumble, the tasting could falter, and she could assert dominance over the proceedings without interference. Her mind worked swiftly, devising a trap that relied on subtlety and accusation, an art she had mastered through years of manipulation and social power. The opportunity presented itself when Matthew bent to assist a clumsy waiter struggling to carry a tray of champagne glasses. His attention was fully on correcting the young man's posture, guiding his hands and steadying the wobbling tray. Christine, moving like a shadow, reached into her designer bag and slipped her diamond engagement ring into the inside pocket of Matthew's jacket. The gesture was imperceptible, executed with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the act 100 times. It was a small, elegant betrayal, designed to ensure maximum humiliation and to remove him from the equation. Moments later, Christine's scream cut through the room, sharp and high-pitched, reverberating off the chandeliers. "My ring! My ring is gone!" Panic and fury laced every syllable. She spun toward Matthew, pointing a manicured finger with the precision of accusation. "It was him! I saw him eyeing it!" Her eyes blazed with a dangerous mix of triumph and vindictiveness. Each word designed to convince the room, to provoke the staff, and to shake the very foundation of Matthew's composure. Matthew froze only briefly, his mind cataloging the scene, analyzing the accusation, and measuring the stakes. He remained calm, raising his hands slowly in a gesture of innocence. His heart thudded in his chest, a mixture of indignation and awareness, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't take it," he said quietly, deliberately, allowing the truth to radiate in its simple clarity. His gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of the staff, Richard, and the security personnel who were beginning to arrive. There was no anger in his tone, no defensiveness, only the calm certainty of innocence. Richard approached, his expression conflicted, torn between the woman he cared for and the man whose integrity he had come to respect. "Matthew," he began hesitantly, his voice low, carrying a weight of doubt and concern. "Are you—" "I did not touch her ring," Matthew interrupted gently, yet with the authority of someone who had learned to trust his own actions and instincts. He straightened, the poise of a man who refused to be diminished, even in the face of deception. Every muscle, every gesture communicated control, dignity, and quiet defiance. The security guard, instructed by Christine, stepped forward, moving toward Matthew with an air of formality and duty. Christine's eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating, as she demanded that the search be conducted immediately. "Check his pockets!" she ordered, her tone cold and commanding. The staff watched with bated breath, the tension thickening with every passing second. Matthew stood perfectly still, hands raised, and allowed the search to proceed, confident in the truth and in the inevitability of its revelation. The guard's fingers probed the interior of the jacket pockets, and for a tense moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, finally, the guard's hand emerged, not with the gleam of the diamond, but holding a simple, crumpled napkin. The ring was gone. Christine's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as shock overtook fury. Her lips parted, her voice faltering as the enormity of her failed scheme became apparent. She had relied on accusation, manipulation, and the illusion of power to achieve her aim, only to have the truth reveal itself in the quietest, most undeniable form. Richard exhaled, a mixture of relief and incredulity washing over him. His eyes met Matthew's, filled with newfound respect and recognition of the man's unwavering integrity. The staff exhaled collectively, a wave of tension dissipating as the truth settled over the room. Matthew's calm, his poise, and his refusal to succumb to the trap had protected not only himself, but the dignity of everyone around him. Matthew straightened, eyes meeting Christine's briefly. There was no gloating, no triumph in his gaze, only the quiet assertion of righteousness and the subtle promise that truth would ultimately prevail. Christine's plan had failed, and in its failure, the balance of power had shifted imperceptibly yet irrevocably. As the staff returned to their duties and the room began to settle into a tense, watchful calm, Matthew's mind turned inward, cataloging the implications of the near betrayal. He had been tested, and he had passed, not through aggression, but through measured patience, integrity, and the unwavering refusal to let deception dictate his actions. He understood with clarity that the coming days would demand even greater vigilance, but he also felt the quiet thrill of preparedness. He had survived the trap, preserved honor, and maintained the trust of those who relied on him. The napkin remained in the guard's hand, a small but potent symbol of the collapse of Christine's scheme. And somewhere, deep within, Matthew felt the first stirrings of hope, not just for the success of the wedding, but for the protection of truth, justice, and those who could not defend themselves. The storm had passed for now, but the battle was far from over, and Matthew's resolve burned brighter than ever. The hallway of the Sterling estate was bathed in the soft, golden glow of wall sconces, casting long, elegant shadows across the polished marble floors. Outside, the distant clatter of the final tasting preparations hummed faintly, like a reminder of the chaos that Christine thrived upon. Matthew had stepped away for a moment, reviewing a set of invoices and making careful notes, his mind still processing the intricacies of the event. He was immersed in the meticulous rhythm of his duties when a subtle movement caught his eye. A slight rustle, a delicate shadow brushing past him. It was Millie. Her small frame moved with quiet urgency, her eyes darting nervously as if the weight of the world rested upon her shoulders. Matthew's heart tightened. He knew she had witnessed Christine's ruthless intentions for years, had been forced into silent complicity by fear and intimidation. But now, there was something different in her demeanor, a spark of courage tempered by desperation. Minutes earlier, while Matthew had been distracted by a clumsy waiter struggling with a tray, Millie had seen Christine slip the diamond engagement ring into Matthew's jacket pocket. She had watched silently, understanding instantly the danger this could pose to the man who had once risked everything for her in the diner. Without a sound, without drawing attention, Millie had brushed past Matthew, lifting the ring from the hidden pocket and securing it in her own small hands. The action was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of quiet heroism, a young girl standing up to protect someone who had once protected her. Now, she approached Christine, the ring clasped tightly in her trembling hands. Her voice quavered yet carried a firmness that surprised even her. "You dropped this," she said, extending the ring toward Christine. Her eyes met Christine's, unflinching despite the storm she knew was about to erupt. There was defiance there, yes, but also fear. The delicate balancing act of someone confronting a tyrant, while still aware of the potential consequences. Christine's reaction was immediate and violent. Her face contorted with fury, her eyes blazing with rage as she lunged forward, grabbing Millie's arm with a force that made the girl wince. "You ungrateful brat! I own you!" Christine hissed, her grip like iron, her voice cutting through the elegant calm of the estate. Every ounce of her arrogance, every bit of entitlement, poured into that single act of aggression. Matthew stepped out from the shadows, his presence commanding, silent until this precise moment. "Let her go," he said, his voice low, firm, but imbued with a quiet authority that made the words impossible to ignore. Christine froze for the first time in years. The tension in the hallway now centered not on her, but on the man who had once been powerless and humiliated, but now stood fully in command of the room. Her eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint flashing across them as she realized the magnitude of the shift. This was no longer the meek, obedient waiter she had dismissed with disdain months ago. Matthew was now the manager of the Sterling estate, the orchestrator of the very event she desperately needed. His presence alone carried the power to control the outcome of her plans, and he wielded it with measured precision. Matthew moved closer, his posture calm but assertive. He could feel the quiet pulse of authority radiating through him, the culmination of months of work, vigilance, and integrity. "Touch her again," he warned, his voice steady and unyielding, "and I cancel the contract right now." The words were simple, but their weight was undeniable. The room seemed to hold its breath, every detail, the gleam of chandeliers, the polished floor, the air itself accentuating the confrontation, magnifying the tension between past humiliation and present authority. Christine's face twisted with disbelief and indignation. She had assumed that fear and manipulation would always bend others to her will. She had built her life on the submission of those around her, and yet here was Matthew, calm, composed, and utterly immovable. Her lips curled into a sneer, defiance mixed with contempt. "You wouldn't dare," she spat. Her voice sharp, brittle, clinging to the illusion of power. "You need this job." Matthew leaned in slightly, the distance between them charged with quiet intensity. His eyes were steady, unwavering, radiating the hard-earned strength of someone who had been tested, humiliated, and risen above it. "I don't need this job," he replied quietly, each word deliberate, each syllable a testament to integrity and resolve. He allowed a pause, letting the weight of his statement settle like a stone in the quiet air. Then, almost under his breath, yet loud enough to pierce the tension, he added, "But you definitely need this wedding." The hallway seemed to contract around them, as if the very walls recognized the shift in power. The reversal of roles that had been months in the making. Christine's hand loosened on Millie's arm, the grip of control slipping even as her mind raced to reclaim it. Millie, sensing the protection surrounding her, straightened slightly, her fear still present but tempered by the knowledge that she was no longer alone. She looked at Matthew, eyes shining with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and admiration, the unspoken bond between them deepened by shared courage and mutual respect. Matthew's presence was calm yet formidable, an anchor in the storm of Christine's fury. He did not raise his voice, did not move with aggression. He merely stood, a living embodiment of integrity, vigilance, and quiet strength. Christine, for all her bluster, was momentarily powerless in the face of someone who had turned past injustice into moral authority. In that charged moment, the entire balance shifted. The young girl, once fearful and submissive, now held a piece of the puzzle that could unravel Christine's manipulation. The man, once humiliated and dismissed, now commanded authority not through intimidation, but through earned respect, experience, and unwavering principle. The power dynamic had irrevocably changed. Millie's fingers relaxed around the ring, and she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible exhale, the tension in her body softening. Christine's shoulders tightened, her mind racing to reclaim dominance, yet she could not ignore the reality before her. Matthew's voice, calm and unwavering, had cut through the tension like a blade. And the unspoken truth was clear. She was no longer in control. The hallway remained silent except for the faint echo of Christine's breathing, the distant murmur of the estate beyond, and the quiet, steady presence of Matthew beside Millie. For the first time, the girl felt a sense of safety, and the man felt the profound satisfaction of standing for what was right, protecting those who could not protect themselves, and turning past injustice into the foundation for courage and renewal. The confrontation ended, but its implications stretched far beyond the hallway. The alliance between Matthew and Millie had crystallized, built upon trust, shared experience, and the recognition of courage in the face of oppression. Christine's sneer lingered in the air, but it was powerless against the truth that had been quietly revealed. Integrity, vigilance, and courage were now the forces shaping the destiny of the Sterling estate. The Sterling estate was quieter than usual, the calm before the storm that would arrive in less than 48 hours. In the softly lit office overlooking the sprawling gardens, Matthew sat across from Mr. Arthur Sterling, the weight of urgency and responsibility pressing on both men. Papers, carefully organized and annotated, lay between them, chronicling weeks of observation, investigation, and quiet courage. Matthew had compiled everything he had discovered: the bullying, the manipulations, the forged trust fund documents, the small cruelties inflicted upon Millie that, when pieced together, revealed a pattern of calculated abuse and theft. Mr. Sterling's steely blue eyes, framed by the wisdom and experience of decades, scanned the documents with deliberate care. There was no rush, no impatience, only the steady, methodical evaluation of a man who had learned the importance of discernment. He looked up at Matthew, not with pity, but with the respect reserved for those who had borne injustice with courage. "You've done your homework thoroughly," he said quietly. His voice carried weight, not just in tone, but in authority, in understanding, in the quiet judgment of a man accustomed to discerning character. Matthew leaned forward, hands clasped, as he recounted the events in measured tones. He spoke not with anger, but with a calm precision, allowing the facts and their emotional impact to reveal themselves naturally. "Christine has been manipulating her sister, draining her inheritance, and plotting a wedding for personal gain. Millie has been frightened, silenced, and used. The trust fund documents were forged, and the implications are severe. I believe if nothing is done, she will continue to abuse and manipulate the people around her, particularly Millie." Mr. Sterling listened intently, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the full scope of the revelations. After a long, deliberate pause, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "Matthew," he said, his voice measured, "there is more to this than just the documents. I am Richard's godfather. I have cared for him since childhood, guided him, and yes, I have watched who he chooses to place his trust in. I care deeply about who he will marry, about who will influence his life and his wealth." Matthew felt the weight of this revelation settle over him. The godfather of the man Christine intended to marry had just entrusted him implicitly with the authority to intervene, to protect not just Millie, but the integrity of the man who was blind to Christine's manipulations. "Mr. Sterling continued, "you have my full authority to handle this situation however you see fit. I trust your judgment, your integrity, and your discretion." The responsibility settled heavily on Matthew's shoulders. He had faced judgment, humiliation, and systemic injustice before, but this was different. This was the culmination of weeks of careful observation, subtle intervention, and moral fortitude. It was a chance to protect not only Millie, but also Richard from entering a life built on deception and abuse. He nodded solemnly, acknowledging the trust placed in him. "I won't let you down, sir," he said quietly, the conviction in his tone carrying the full weight of his moral compass. Later that evening, Matthew sought out Richard for a private conversation. Richard, good-natured and well-meaning, had always been the kind of man who saw the best in people. His faith in Christine was unshakable, a lens tinted by love that obscured truth and reason. Matthew approached him gently, understanding that confrontation without evidence would only breed doubt and defensiveness. "Richard," Matthew began, his voice low and careful, "I need to speak with you about Christine. You care for her, I understand that, but there are things you should know before it's too late." Richard's brow furrowed, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Matthew, I trust you, but I love her. I don't want to hear something that could be exaggerated." Matthew met his gaze steadily, allowing the weight of his integrity and experience to anchor the conversation. "I understand," he said softly. "But tonight, during the rehearsal dinner, I want you to do something very simple. Watch the monitors. Just watch. See and hear for yourself. Don't react. Don't accuse. Just observe." Richard hesitated, conflicted, torn between loyalty, love, and the trust he placed in Matthew. The hesitation was brief. He nodded. a quiet acknowledgement that he was willing to place himself in a position to see the truth without judgment clouding his perception. The evening of the rehearsal arrived, the estate bathed in the warm, golden glow of chandeliers and candlelight. The staff moved with precision, a testament to Matthew's leadership and the trust they had come to place in him. Christine entered, radiant in her designer dress, every movement a study in calculated confidence. She greeted guests and staff with a practiced smile, her eyes glinting with the arrogance of someone who believed she was untouchable. Matthew stood slightly to the side, watching, waiting. His heart was steady, his mind focused on the plan that would reveal the truth without fanfare or immediate confrontation. He moved with subtlety, a quiet, practiced grace as he positioned himself near a small table. With a careful, seemingly accidental gesture, he let a single drop of water escape from a glass he was holding. It splashed lightly onto the tablecloth near Christine, catching the light and drawing her attention. Her reaction was instantaneous. "What is this?" she barked, her voice sharp and shrill, drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. "Who is responsible for this mess?" The veneer of composure shattered as Christine's irritation boiled over, and in her fury she revealed the inner truth she had long concealed. Words, sharp and hateful, tumbled from her mouth. "You worthless fools! I am marrying that boring idiot Richard for his money. I don't care about any of you, any of this. It's all about me, always about me." Richard, watching the monitors as Matthew had instructed, froze as the words sank in. Every accusation, every insult, every slur was captured in crystal clarity. Christine's pretense of refinement, her carefully constructed facade, was crumbling in real time. The hidden microphone had done its work, recording the raw, unfiltered confession of her motives and prejudices. Matthew observed quietly, the satisfaction of meticulous planning tempered by the empathy he felt for Richard, who was seeing the woman he loved for who she truly was for the first time. The room, filled with staff, guests, and the hushed reverence of the rehearsal, seemed suspended in anticipation, waiting for the aftermath of truth to settle. For Matthew, the moment was not about revenge or triumph. It was about justice, about revealing the reality that had long been hidden behind manipulation and fear. He felt the quiet satisfaction of using integrity, patience, and careful planning to illuminate truth, to protect those who could not protect themselves, and to create the conditions for moral clarity to prevail. And in that instant, as Christine raged and Richard watched in stunned silence, Matthew knew the path forward was clear. The foundation of deception had been exposed, and the power to reshape the future rested in the hands of truth, courage, and unwavering principle. The grand ballroom of the Sterling estate was a vision of opulence, its high ceilings adorned with crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, glittering glow over the polished marble floors. The air was heavy with the scent of fresh flowers and the subtle perfume of carefully chosen candles, their aromas mingling in a delicate symphony. Every detail had been executed with painstaking care, from the ornate floral arrangements that cascaded along the balconies to the gold-trimmed place settings that reflected the soft light. It was a space designed to impress, to awe, to signal wealth and power, and Christine moved through it as if she owned every inch of it. Her smile was calculated, triumphant, her posture immaculate, her designer dress hugging her frame with the precision of someone who believed victory was written in silk and sequins. She imagined herself untouchable, triumphant in a world that had always bent to her whims. Matthew moved through the ballroom with a quiet authority that contrasted sharply with Christine's ostentation. His eyes scanned the room, catching every misplaced napkin, every hesitant server, every subtle flaw in timing. He coordinated the staff with military precision, yet his presence was invisible to most, felt only as an undercurrent of calm efficiency. Every gesture was deliberate, every instruction measured. The room was alive with anticipation. Yet it was his discipline that held the energy in perfect balance. Christine caught his gaze across the room and, with a smirk that carried both disdain and disbelief, mouthed the words, "You're nothing." Her lips curved in a mocking confidence, certain that her triumph had silenced all who had ever dared to oppose her. Matthew's response was a single, controlled nod. He did not argue, he did not flinch. His calm composure carried more weight than any verbal retort ever could, a quiet assertion that she underestimated the power of integrity, experience, and moral courage. The guests settled into their seats, their conversation hushed under the shimmering light of crystal chandeliers. The elite of the city, dressed in tailored suits, evening gowns, and sparkling jewelry, whispered politely, exchanging social pleasantries while awaiting the ceremony. Their murmurs were punctuated by the subtle clinking of champagne glasses and the gentle rustle of silk dresses. It was a scene designed to display sophistication, yet beneath the surface, tension rippled. Unspoken and unnoticed by most, except for those who had seen the truth behind the polished facades. The officiant stepped forward, a solemn presence at the center of the altar, his voice clear and calm as he addressed the assembly. "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now, or forever hold your peace." Silence followed, heavy and expectant, the room holding its collective breath as if the very walls anticipated the outcome. Then, Richard turned to Christine, his expression composed yet resolute. His eyes, normally softened by love and trust, now held a clarity sharpened by the evidence Matthew had carefully orchestrated. "I do not," he said calmly, his words carrying a weight that silenced every murmuring guest. The room reacted instantly, a collective gasp sweeping through the crowd, the sound of disbelief echoing against the ornate walls. Christine's reaction was almost instinctual. She laughed, a nervous, forced sound, attempting to mask the creeping fear that had begun to gnaw at her. "Richard, stop it," she said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the first cracks in the armor of her confidence. She believed he was joking, that this interruption was some fleeting misstep, a moment of confusion that would pass. But even as she spoke, the tension tightened around her like a noose, her triumph dissolving into uncertainty. Richard took a deliberate step back, his posture unchanged, his gaze unwavering. The clarity of his decision radiated through every line of his body, every controlled movement. "I can't marry you," he said firmly, the words slicing through the opulence like a sharp, undeniable truth. The guests exchanged stunned glances, whispers trailing like shadows along the edges of the room. Christine's smile faltered, the calculated elegance replaced by unease and desperation. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Richard continued, his voice steady, imbued with the quiet authority of someone who had finally seen the truth. "But," he said, pausing to let the weight of his next statement sink in, "there is a video the hospitality manager thinks we should all see." His hand gestured subtly toward the massive screens that had been set up for the photo montage. Their purpose now repurposed to reveal the reality that Christine had so carefully hidden. The screens flickered to life, the lights dimming slightly as the images began to play. The guests, still murmuring, quieted instantly, the room collectively drawn toward the unfolding revelation. Faces that had only moments ago been poised with polite attention now displayed a mix of curiosity, tension, and growing apprehension. Matthew, standing unobtrusively to the side, watched the reactions, his expression calm but resolute. The culmination of months of planning and moral courage reflected in the serene composure of his posture. Christine's hands trembled slightly, the subtle quiver betraying her growing awareness that control had slipped through her fingers. The air in the ballroom seemed to thicken with anticipation, the hum of conversation replaced by the silent expectation of an audience witnessing the unveiling of truth. Every breath, every heartbeat, every flutter of silk in the room felt amplified, as if the space itself recognized the impending collapse of deception. Matthew's eyes swept the room, noting the reactions of staff, family, and the elite guests. Each subtle shift, each widening eye, each drawn breath was part of the silent symphony of revelation he had orchestrated. His presence remained understated, a quiet anchor of dignity amidst the growing storm of truth. Richard's gaze never wavered from the screen. His jaw tightened slightly, the shock and disbelief mingling with a growing sense of clarity. For the first time, he saw Christine not as the charming, sophisticated woman he had imagined, but as the manipulative, self-serving person she truly was. The enormity of the revelation, carefully staged and unobtrusively guided by Matthew, settled over him with undeniable weight. And in that charged, silent moment, the balance of power had shifted completely. The room, the elite crowd, and the players within it were united in a suspended awareness, waiting for the undeniable truth to fully reveal itself, and for justice, long delayed, to finally take its place in the hearts of those who had been manipulated. The wedding day had arrived, but it would not proceed as anyone, including Christine, had ever imagined. The screens flickered to life, the soft hum of the projector cutting through the anticipatory silence of the grand ballroom. The ambient lighting dimmed slightly, drawing every eye toward the massive monitors that hung like sentinels over the gathering. The guests, still reeling from Richard's calm rejection, turned in collective curiosity, their expressions ranging from polite interest to mounting unease. For a moment, there was an almost tangible hush, a pause in the very air of the room, as if the estate itself sensed that a moment of reckoning had arrived. What played out on the screens was not the carefully hidden mic audio from the rehearsal dinner, but something far more damning: security footage from the diner months ago, where Matthew had first intervened to protect Millie. Every detail, captured without bias or interpretation, was there. Christine storming into the diner, her designer bag swinging with impatience, her eyes alight with superiority. Her voice sharp and unforgiving as she screamed at the young girl, Millie, calling her ugly with a venomous certainty. And the way she spat words of disdain at Matthew, the humble waiter, the man whose only crime had been the act of kindness and courage. The footage shifted seamlessly, showing the most damning moment: Christine, in cold calculation, slipping her engagement ring into Matthew's jacket pocket while his back was turned. The scene was subtle, almost imperceptible at first glance, but once recognized, its clarity was undeniable. Gasps rippled through the ballroom, the sound of disbelief and shock echoing against the marble and crystal. The carefully constructed image of Christine, polished, triumphant, untouchable, was unraveling in real time, frame by frame, under the unflinching gaze of the crowd. Whispers began, low and incredulous, spreading like wildfire from table to table. "Is that her?" one guest murmured, her eyes wide, voice barely above a breath. Another leaned toward her companion, shaking his head slowly. "I can't believe it. She lied to all of us." The murmurs were punctuated by the occasional intake of breath, the subtle clink of cutlery forgotten in trembling hands, the sharp shift in energy as the social equilibrium of the room began to collapse. Christine's face, once a mask of triumph and control, became a canvas of panic and disbelief. Her eyes darted from screen to screen, mouth opening and closing as though searching for words that could undo what was irrevocably displayed before the audience. Her finely tuned composure, the polished elegance she had cultivated for decades, cracked under the weight of undeniable truth. Every polished gesture, every rehearsed smile, every calculated glance had been stripped away, leaving her raw and exposed before the very people whose admiration she had long assumed. Murmurs grew into audible expressions of disgust. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats, their polite postures faltering as they watched a person they had respected, or at least envied, reveal herself as manipulative, cruel, and deceitful. The hierarchy that Christine had relied upon, wealth, appearance, social connections, crumbled in an instant, replaced by the undeniable force of truth. In the center of the room, Matthew remained composed, a silent anchor amid the emotional turbulence. His eyes scanned the crowd, noting the subtle reactions, the widening eyes, the small gestures of shock and dismay. He felt no satisfaction in the humiliation of Christine. Instead, his focus was on the broader triumph of integrity, courage, and justice. The footage revealed what he had known all along, that standing up for what is right, even in the face of personal cost, is a power greater than any social advantage. At that moment, Millie stepped forward, her small hand clutching another, far heavier symbol of empowerment, a lawyer, hired by Matthew, who now stood beside her like a shield. The young girl, once trembling in fear and silenced by intimidation, lifted her chin with a quiet dignity. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly throughout the ballroom. "I am pressing charges for embezzlement," she announced, each word precise, measured, carrying the authority of truth and justice. "Christine Vanderhoven is being evicted from our family home, effective immediately." The words hit the guests like a thunderclap. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and murmurs of astonishment spread like wildfire. The image of Christine as a socialite, untouchable and cunning, had been replaced entirely by the reality of her greed, manipulation, and cruelty. The room was unified in its reaction. Stunned, morally outraged, and deeply satisfied by the vindication of right over wrong. Christine's reaction was instantaneous, a storm of fury and disbelief. Her body trembled with rage, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for an explanation, an excuse, a way to regain control. This isn't real. You can't do this to me. You ruined everything," she shrieked, her voice piercing and desperate, cutting through the subdued chaos of the stunned ballroom. She lunged toward Matthew, the culmination of her fury and frustration, a desperate attempt to strike at the man she blamed for dismantling the life she had meticulously constructed. But she was no longer unchallenged. Matthew's staff, loyal and steady, moved instinctively, forming a protective barrier around him. Their hands, firm yet controlled, intercepted her advance, blocking her path while maintaining the professionalism and composure Matthew had instilled in them. Christina's fury, though undiminished, met the first true resistance she had encountered, one born not of fear, but of moral authority and careful preparation. Millie's eyes were fixed on Christine, a mixture of relief, triumph, and a deep, unspoken compassion in her gaze. The girl who had once been silenced now stood at the forefront of justice, her courage validated, her agency restored. Matthew remained calm, his posture unwavering, a silent testament to the truth that courage and integrity, when wielded wisely, have the power to protect and transform. Christine struggled against the staff, her face a portrait of hysteria and ruin. Every scream, every accusation, every desperate plea was met with composed, unflinching authority. She had built her life on manipulation and the fear of others, and now she faced the consequences of her choices in a room full of witnesses who had once been deceived. The social mask that had allowed her to climb, to intimidate, and to manipulate was shattered irreparably, leaving only the stark reality of her actions displayed in full view of all. As the room settled into a tense silence, the guests processing the magnitude of what they had witnessed, a quiet clarity emerged. Matthew's integrity, Millie's courage, and the power of truth had prevailed. The injustice of the past was met with accountability, and in the aftermath, the possibility of healing and renewal shimmered faintly across the room. For the first time, justice was not theoretical, was visible, undeniable, and complete. The cameras faded from the screens, leaving Christine exposed, powerless, and defeated. Matthew exhaled quietly, a subtle release of tension that mirrored the collective catharsis of the room. The stage had been set not for revenge, but for redemption. for the triumph of moral courage over deception, and for the recognition that standing for what is right can transform the lives of those who had been silenced and oppressed. The echoes of Christine's shrill screams lingered in the grand hall of the Sterling estate long after she had been escorted out. The doors had closed behind her, cutting off her furious cries, but the sound of her unraveling life seemed to linger like a shadow, a reminder of the consequences that inevitably followed deceit, cruelty, and greed. The guests, their faces a mixture of pity and incredulity, watched silently as the woman who had once projected power and dominance now staggered in humiliation. Her carefully cultivated image, the very armor she had relied upon for years, had disintegrated completely in the eyes of everyone present. The gown that had seemed so regal now hung on her with a sense of futility, her makeup streaked, her hair slightly disheveled, and the sharpness of her voice replaced by desperation and disbelief. She had lost everything: her fiancé, the wealth she had manipulated, and the social standing she had so meticulously maintained. Matthew, standing slightly to the side, observed the scene with calm detachment, his posture composed yet imbued with a quiet strength. There was no triumph in his gaze, only the serene satisfaction of justice fulfilled. He had not orchestrated this moment out of malice. Rather, it had been the careful, patient work of ensuring that truth and integrity prevailed over deception and cruelty. His thoughts drifted momentarily to the diner months ago, to the sting of injustice when he had been fired in a moment of false judgment. That day had left a mark, a reminder of vulnerability and resilience, and now, standing amidst the aftermath of vindication, he realized that the bitterness he had once felt had been transformed into fuel, into a guiding force that had led him here. Richard approached cautiously, his expression still a mixture of shock and relief. His hands, trembling slightly, extended toward Matthew in a gesture that was both formal and deeply sincere. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for saving me from a life of misery, for protecting me from someone I thought I could trust." His gaze met Matthew's, and in that silent exchange there was a recognition of courage and foresight. A bond forged not in friendship alone, but in the shared experience of confronting harsh truths. Matthew nodded, acknowledging the depth of gratitude without the need for words. There was a quiet dignity in their interaction, a subtle but profound acknowledgement that justice had been restored, and that the future was now unburdened by deception. Nearby, Millie stood with her eyes shimmering with tears, a mixture of relief, awe, and newfound confidence reflecting in her gaze. She crossed the polished floor of the ballroom and without hesitation threw her arms around Matthew, her small frame trembling slightly as she rested her head against his chest. I can't believe it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. You really saved me." Matthew gently hugged her back, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You are never alone, Millie. You have the strength to move forward now, and the right people around you. This is your life to reclaim." She pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting his with gratitude and a quiet determination. "I'm going to live with my aunt," she said softly, a smile breaking across her face. She actually loves me, and I have my inheritance back." The weight of years of fear, manipulation, and uncertainty lifted, and in that simple exchange, the promise of hope and renewal shimmered with undeniable clarity. As the room began to settle, Mr. Arthur Sterling approached Matthew, his presence calm yet commanding. The elderly man's eyes reflected pride and quiet admiration as he extended his hand once more. "Matthew," he said, "you have proven yourself not just capable, but exceptional. I want you to know that you are not merely the manager of this estate anymore. I would like to offer you a partnership in the company. Your vision, your integrity, and your courage are exactly what this enterprise needs." Matthew's eyes widened slightly, the weight of the offer settling over him. He shook Sterling's hand firmly, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I won't let you down," he replied, his voice steady, reflecting a mixture of humility and quiet pride. Later, as the last of the guests departed and the estate's staff tidied the final traces of the day's upheaval, Matthew found himself on the balcony overlooking the sprawling grounds. The gardens stretched out beneath him, bathed in the soft glow of the evening sun, their meticulously manicured paths now carrying a calm serenity after the day's chaos. He breathed deeply, the cool air filling his lungs, and allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought back to the day he had been dismissed from the diner, to the bitterness and despair that had once threatened to consume him. Yet, here he stood, not defined by the injustices of the past, but elevated by the strength, integrity, and courage he had nurtured in their wake. The horizon seemed endless, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled genuinely, a sense of peace and accomplishment washing over him. The ballroom below, now quiet and still, felt like a monument to the trials overcome, the truths revealed, and the lives transformed. Millie's laughter could be heard faintly from the garden as she spoke with her aunt, a sound of liberation and joy. Richard's voice, calm and resolute, carried a tone of newfound clarity as he discussed his future without deceit clouding his path. Matthew's heart swelled not from victory over another, but from the restoration of justice and the renewal of hope. As he looked out over the estate, the memory of every small choice, every moment of courage, and every act of integrity felt vivid. The day he had been fired had not been an end, it had been a beginning. Every trial, every injustice had been transformed into a lesson, a stepping stone toward a life defined not by bitterness, but by the power to protect, uplift, and inspire. Text appeared across the screen of the estate's main monitors, subtle yet profound, capturing the essence of the journey that had unfolded. True strength isn't about power. It's about protecting those who have none. Matthew remained on the balcony a moment longer, the sun dipping low, casting long golden shadows across the grounds. He allowed himself one final breath of the evening air, a quiet celebration of resilience, justice, and redemption. The past had shaped him, but it no longer bound him. The future, expansive and untainted, stretched out before him, promising hope, integrity, and the quiet courage to face whatever challenges might come. And for those watching this story unfold, he might have smiled inwardly, inviting them to witness the power of standing for what is right. A gentle, knowing thought passed through his mind. Subscribe. Stay with those who seek truth, and remember that integrity is always worth the effort.